Hey, you. Yes, you, listener. We want to thank you for making the David McWilliams podcast, the very one you're listening to right now, the 5th most listened to podcast this year. And believe me, that means so much to us. So thank you.
To understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
Tomorrow is the election day. Oh, look at that. It's the election day in Ireland, which we won't even bother talking about it because it's all done and dusted. Although I see, John.
We'll talk about it next week.
Fine Gael are slumping in the polls at exactly the time they don't want to.
Yeah, I know. But polls, schmoles. I mean, we've had those polls in the States and, you know, polls seem to be less accurate now.
Much, much less accurate. So listen, we'll come back to the Irish election next week when it's all done and dusted.
Speaking of other polls, as it were, I'm reading the Financial Times.
You're manfully thumbing through the Financial Times. And the Economist.
Yes, and the Economist, yes. And I'm looking at, you know, listeners, may I just say this directly to you? Christmas is coming. Did you know that? And a book is a wonderful present.
An amazing present. An amazing present.
No, but and honestly, the FT and The Economist have put Money, A Story of Humanity as their top reads for 2024, which is quite an achievement, Mark.
It is.
I'm going to let you brag for
I will put it down to your judicious editing over the course of the last 4 years as I swatted away down here in the basement on all sorts of issues of monetary. No, it's great. So the Economist and the FT have named Money, again, one of their top books in economics.
Yeah.
Which is great because it's the whole world. It's America, Canada, the US, and of course the UK. And
I can just see now many Christmas tables when they're pulling crackers and stuff. There's going to be enormous scraps over money.
I said that. Well, I think you're absolutely right. It's an amazing Christmas present. And I think that if you give this to the nerd in your life, the economist in their life, the odd economic historian in your life, you will be repaid with all sorts of favours. And the delights of Christmas will be bestowed upon you in all sorts of ways if you go down to your local bookshop and buy Money. Actually, but on that issue, also what would be quite nice is if you review it. Review it on Amazon and Goodreads and all that, because that helps a lot.
Yeah.
No, John, it's been a great run. It's been done very well the last 3 months now. It's been, close to or top of the charts for almost every week. So it's really good.
And the tour helped, I'm sure.
The tour helped enormously. And we may well go back. Are we thinking of an Australian tour?
Ooh, I wouldn't say that on mic, but yes, can we go?
I think we are. We're thinking of bringing the travelling caravan around. Maybe the UK, maybe Australia, maybe. Well, that's all 2025.
Yes,
let's just see. But anyway, let us get on. The reason that we're bragging about money is because today's podcast is also going to be about money. Because one of the things in the book is to try and explain to the layman, to the non-economic expert,
that's me,
to the non-monetary economist. Well, I'm telling you, the podcast was incredibly judicious in teasing out those things because for so long, I would only discuss these things with other people who had studied monetary economics. And you assume a huge amount of knowledge and you assume people understand things. And then you realize, actual fact, this thing that is so important to us is so misunderstood because our schools don't teach kids about money.
Yeah.
Our schools don't teach. I've always said, economics is educated out of us, right?
Yeah.
That people naturally understand economics. Remember, I told you that example of when we were kids playing football cards.
Yes, yeah.
Right? Every little boy when we were kids played football cards. But that meant so I had 2 Kenny Dalglishs for one of your, whatever, Joe Jordans or whatever. Right, okay. But it means the kids understand, little boys, 7, 8-year-old boys, right? And loads of girls play it now, of course, yeah. Now it's called match attacks, but it's the same idea.
Yeah.
They understood demand, supply, scarcity, price, all that stuff. So they were actually playing economics in the school ground. Exactly. And yet, when it came to the Leaving Cert or the A-levels or whatever the equivalent is, people thought economics was hard. So what actually happened was economics was educated out of us because naturally, I think we have a natural aptitude for it.
Well, absolutely. And actually what got me more into economics or piqued my interest in economics was actually from a geographical perspective. You know,
Yeah.
my degree is environmental science,
Yeah.
but looking at the environment, how you price the environment, for instance,
Yes.
you know, carbon taxes and all the rest. But, you know, from that environmental perspective and geographical perspective, I got totally into economics. You know, why we do the things because of, you know, where it is that you live.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think economics and geography are very closely related. I also think economics and biology are very closely related. I've said many times before on the podcast that one of the dilemmas of economics is it began to brand itself as a poor man's physics,
Yeah.
and that's when it lost its way. But one of the areas that is least well understood and is actually most consequential is the area of monetary policy, interest rates, inflation rates, financialization, asset prices, busts, credit expansions, all those sort of things, right? And today we're going to talk about this because many people are probably aware of the gold standard. And many people might have heard of the Bretton Woods system. And that is the system of financial architecture that holds everything together, right? This is the key thing. So there is a system of financial architecture that holds everything together, that relates the United States to China, to Europe, to Africa, through the flows of money. And the vector along which the money travels is the rate of exchange, right? The exchange rate, okay? And what we're seeing is we have a world now where we have free movements, or we have had up till now, free movements of capital. So money flowing all around the world. People have got to get their heads around, the figures are so enormous, like trillions on trillions and trillions and trillions. But we have also had a system of managed exchange rates. And why this matters is that if you have money flowing all around the world, and if you have exchange rates that fluctuate to reflect where the money is going, in effect, this system should balance itself out.
Sorry, just a little aside. I wish I was filming this because Macker looks like he's doing a dance with his hands.
Well, this is the teacher in me, John. This is the teacher in me. I'm conducting an imaginary orchestra here. I'm like, oboe, go for it. Yes, the man in the trombone, go for it. So yes, I am. I'm using my hands, which I've always been accused. I remember when I used to do a lot of TV. You know, and the hands would be going, and the producer would say, put your hands on their bloody, stand on your hands, sit your hands. Exactly. Anyway, point is, all this money is flowing around, but we have certain countries that actually manage their exchange rate. Now, why this matters is we're going to go on and talk to a man called Russell Napier. Russell Napier, amongst other things, runs the brilliantly entitled Library of Mistakes, which is in fact what economics is. It's a whole series of mistakes.
Yeah.
You learn, right? And what we want to do is explain the present monetary system, which doesn't have a name, but has been in situ for 25 or 30 years, number one.
Yeah.
What that has done to the global economy, what that has done to asset prices, and why, and this goes back to my son Cal's question to me, which was, Dad, explain to me what happened in the world, not just in Ireland, but in Britain, in America, all over the English-speaking world. What happened in the last 3 decades that means he, in his early 20s, has no prospect of ever buying a home. And me, in my early 20s, could imagine buying a flat by my late 20s. He says, what happened to the world? And we're going to explain that through the mechanism of explaining the global financial architecture. Because lots of people talk, it's about democracy and it's about tax policy and it's about, you know, the way in which land is hoarded and the way in which things are developed. But they are all issues, but there is one overriding issue, which is what the new global financial architecture and the emergence of China did to, specifically, John, the rate of interest and the connection between the rate of interest and the growth of the economy. So why don't we go to Scotland, where Russell is holed up in a place called the Black Isle, which is a long way away, and get this take, because I think this take is unique. I think it explains a lot, and I don't think it's been articulated enough on podcasts, on the airwaves, and certainly not in academic economics. So let's go to Scotland. Russell Napier, one of the greatest monetary historians, and a man from Donaghadee up in County Down, a place you might know, home of the Two Door Cinema Club. If nothing else came out of Donaghadee, it was the Two Door Cinema Club.
Great
Russell,
band.
you are up in the middle of nowhere in Scotland. Where are you? Tell us where you are first before we talk about money.
Place called the Black Isle on the shores of the Merry Firth, and as only you can see and nobody else can, I'm wearing a coat because it's rather cold.
It's freezing, isn't it? So anyway, no better place to discuss the future of money.
Absolutely. I mean, there's actually a little link between the Black Isle and the history of money, because the Invergordon Mutiny occurred just behind me.
Now tell me, what was the Invergordon Mutiny?
Well, the Invergordon Mutiny was allegedly the sailors going on strike, and this was in the depths of the Great Depression. And the word got to Westminster that the sailors were allegedly on strike, and they figured, well, we forced the people through enough in this Great Depression. The deflation of wages is too much. If even the Navy won't go to work, it's time to end the gold standard. Now, whether that's the correct narrative or not, it is one that goes down in the mythology of the end of Britain leaving the gold standard, that it happened at Invergordon, just a few miles from where I'm sitting.
I love it, because it's exactly that which we're going to talk about. So you mentioned the gold standard there, and many of the listeners will be aware that over the years there's been various systems of monetary and economic, but particularly monetary and financial arrangements. What we want to do here, we want to answer the question posed by my son to me during an Irish election, which has been going on the last while. And he said, Dad, listen, I get all this economic stuff, right? Well, I don't really, but I'm following it. He says, why is it that your generation could afford to buy houses at a rate of a multiple of your income that seemed affordable, and we cannot? Our generation are totally and utterly blacked out of the housing market. Now, Russell, you wrote something fascinating about a month ago, which may well explain this, but in the context, we're going to have to go all over the world and genuflect to the gold standard to explain it. So explain to me the answer to that question, potentially through your own work.
Right. We shall start with a conclusion and work backwards.
Yes.
Which is, economists believe that there's a relationship between interest rates and the growth of the economy. And they believe that fervently, and it's not always true, and it certainly has not been true. And therefore, interest rates have been too low relative to the growth in the economy. This leads to higher asset prices and more leverage. The question is why we got that gap, and why nothing was done about it. Now, you might think that the European Central Bank is charged with sorting that out, or the Federal Reserve is sorting that out. But there is something, it's called a global monetary system, such as a thing that used to be called the gold standard. If you ask anybody what the current global monetary standard is, they'll say, I don't know, it doesn't exist. But it absolutely exists. In fact, Paul Volcker used to call it the non-system. So if we're looking for the root cause of why there's been this gap between the growth rate in the economy and the interest rates, we have to go and look outside of each national central bank to the global monetary system. And as you said, that takes us far away from Dublin, far away from the northeast of Scotland to Beijing. And I know people will find it rather peculiar to think that getting priced out of the Dublin housing market has anything to do with Beijing, but actually there is a link.
So what you're saying is that in the old days, right, and I'm talking about when I was a kid, having a rate of interest of 10, 12, 13% was kind of normal, in the sense that this was the world we were brought up in. It was the world our parents were brought up in. The rate of interest could be 10% and you deal with it. And the growth rate of the economy could be 5%. So there was a real interest rate of about 5, maybe 6%. And that seemed logical. And people could save and they could get that rate of interest of 6%, so they could keep their money in deposit stably and happily. And also those of people who invested could inculcate that rate of interest in their calculations about how much income they had to earn in order to pay the money back. And that was how the old system kind of worked for the average punter on the ground.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And the levels of leverage in society in those days were much, much lower. And now we've got to levels of society in the government and also the private sector, which are, depending on which economy you're in, close to record high. And it's the rise from low levels of debt to high level debt, which has impacted residential property prices and made prices more expensive.
So let's go to Beijing. Let's go from Inverness, Donaghadee, Dublin to Beijing.
Okay, the gold standard is over and everything that's past is over. And now we're in something different. Let's call it the non-system. It's good enough for Paul Volcker. It's good enough for me. So since 1994, the Chinese have linked their currency to the dollar and then to a basket of currencies. Now, most people will think, well, what on earth has that got to do with Dublin property prices? Let me explain. It doesn't happen automatically. You have to manage it. The two things that China did that depressed global interest rates, but also elevated global growth, was number one, to keep the exchange rate down, they actually had to buy a lot of the government bonds of the developed world. They had to intervene in the stock market, and they're a non-price sensitive buyer.
So explain all this to me.
Okay, so let's take one given day on the operation of what would happen. So the People's Bank of China, the central bank, sees the upward pressure on its own currency and says, no, this shall not pass. So it enters the market and it creates and sells new renminbi for, let's just say, dollars. It ends up owning dollars. And then the question is, what's it going to do with them? And what it does with them is buys government bonds of the United States of America. Now, it actually works broadly. So it's buying bonds of the United States of America, the euro, sterling, Australia. But it is in this action depressing the interest rates of the developed world. So it's got that direct mispricing of the debt. Now, economists, I don't think, agree that this can happen because they would say that there should be a relationship. Interest rates should reset. There should be somebody working the other way against the PBOC, and interest rates should reflect domestic economic growth. But it's certainly my argument that for a very long period of time, they didn't because of that action. And I should have just add quickly, it wasn't just the People's Bank of China. From 1998 onwards, really the whole of the emerging markets got into this business as well, for reasons I won't go into, and that supercharged the whole thing. And I'll give you a number. So when we start this period back in 94, the total value of foreign currency bonds held by these central banks is $1 trillion US. And by the time we finish it, it's closer to 12 trillion US dollars. And that all happens in the space of 20 years. So that buying of those bonds distorts their price relative to the growth rate.
So the Chinese, and we're going to get on to the reasons why they want their currency weak in a second, but they want a currency that is weaker than would be the case if they let their currency be dictated by the market. So what they do is they see the money comes into China. They say, okay, the last thing we want to do is allow our currency rise. So what we're going to do is we are going to buy up all these dollars. We're going to sell our own currency, which depresses the price. Then we have the dollars. We think, okay, we can't buy anything in China with dollars because we actually don't use dollars in the day-to-day currency. So we can buy stuff outside China. And this then breaks the link between our growth and our interest rates because the Chinese are suppressing the interest rates here. So the real interest rates are moving towards negative, which is encouraging and coaxing people to invest and or speculate. That's where we're at.
Absolutely correct. That's round one. Let's go to round two.
Round two, okay.
What happens in round two is the Chinese are now creating lots of local currency, and they actually invest it in new productive capacity. And over this particular period, there are actually hundreds of millions of Chinese people who can flock to the cities. And so the second way they depress interest rates is they export deflation. They export cheaper and cheaper products to the rest of the world. And that tends also to push down interest rates because people who buy bonds want compensation for inflation. And inflation's very low. They'll accept very low interest rates. So round two is the second act in depressing interest rates relative to the growth rate. Historically, people would have thought, inflation in Ireland will only come down if the Irish economy contracts. But actually, in a world where China is going through the biggest investment boom in history, Irish inflation can come down because China's exporting so much cheap stuff to Ireland.
Exactly. And so the second order is deflation in real goods, in real stuff, computers and cars and whatever the hell you like. We're looking at the amount of solar energy systems made in China, all sorts of things, right? So that's the second order. So again, we're in a low inflation world. The low inflation world comes from a choice made in Beijing. Third thing.
Well, the third thing is how we react to that. So if you have this world of low interest rates, but the economy doing reasonably well, it leads people to borrow more money. that's what happens. And if you're going to borrow more money because actually your economy is growing, wages are growing, but inflation's low, what are you going to use that money for? Lots of things it can be used for, but residential property is going to be high on the list. So as we watch across the developed world for wherever you are, more and more debt in the household sector. And it comes at exactly the same time as the Chinese change their exchange rate. And that's the link through to residential property prices.
Mac, let's just hold Russell there, because Russell talked for a half an hour or more on other parts of the
system, the architecture.
Yes, but we're going to come back to that in an episode for next week, because I just want to hone in on this particular bit. So since 2008, the great financial crisis, and central banks introduced QE as the remedy to get us all out of this mess. So pumped loads of money into the banking system and reduced interest rates.
Yeah.
So that was always given as the explanation for the asset prices shooting up and all the rest, which is true. But this Chinese strategy also compounds that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You can so we're talking about a 30-year period from around 1994, 95 to 2025. So it's a 30-year period, more or less. And I remember being in China, in Hong Kong in 1997 at the IMF's annual bash in Hong Kong. And it's funny, little do you know when you're discussing these things, what's actually going on. It's only with hindsight you figure things out. So yes, I think you're right. So let's say that 30-year period, we'll divide it up into two halves, right?
Yeah.
The first half's
it's a game of two halves.
Game of two halves. Absolutely. You're Johnny Giles over there. Your first period up until, let's say, the crash, and then your second period, which is QE, right? So the first thing is what Russell has identified there is, and I think it's really interesting, is the impact of China, because we always assume that the impact of China can be measured in real things. And by that, I mean in cars, in computers, all this, made in China.
Yeah.
So it's cheap goods being made cheaply by a hugely expanded labor force that got into the globalized world in the early 90s and began to export its way to growth. So that's the story that most people know, and it's the story that leads us to tariffs and Trumpism and all that.
Yeah.
But there is another story that Russell has just told, which is, I think, more interesting, but much less well understood, which is the fact that as China opened up, lots and lots of money flooded into China to avail of the investment opportunities. That money was in dollars. Let's just call it dollars. It could have been in euros, it could have been in sterling, it could have been in yen, but let's just call it dollars. It was in a foreign currency.
Yeah.
So what the Central Bank of China did, firstly, was say, we can only grow as a country if our exchange rate is undervalued, not overvalued, because that'll make our goods really cheap in America.
Yeah.
And what we really want to do is we want to gain market share in America, because that is the way we're going to get rich. Because at the moment, we're very poor. And they were very poor in the 90s, right? So the last thing you do is impinge on your competitiveness by allowing your exchange rate to increase to reflect the amount of money that comes in. So it's a thing called sterilization. This is central bank speak, right?
Yeah.
So sterilization means you have to sterilize the inflows of foreign currency into your country to make sure your exchange rate doesn't rise. So how do you do this? So if you imagine the way in which you keep your exchange rate low is you buy foreign exchange and you sell your own exchange rate, right? Okay, so how do you do that is you print your own money. So the first thing the Chinese did is the dollars came into China. They said, okay, why don't we let these all expand in our foreign reserves? We will sterilize all these dollars by exchanging them for our own currency, right? So suddenly the Chinese money supply begins to expand. The Chinese money supply expands in renminbis, not in dollars, in renminbis. So you can only use renminbis in China. They then do two things. With the dollars they have in their reserves, they also buy American government treasuries. Right? So the IOUs of the American economy. Now, why do they do this? Because they want America to keep buying stuff even if it means America has to go further and further into debt to do so. So they're facilitating the delinquency of the American consumer by actually buying all the debt that the Americans are issuing.
Right.
That's number one, right? So that keeps the American economy ticking over.
Right.
Secondly,
And America needs this, of course.
America needs it because it's running a budget deficit,
Yeah.
right? So it needs somebody to finance it,
Yeah.
right? And actually, the second part of our discussion with Russell is just how fragile America is. Trump thinks America is really, really strong, but it's not. We'll talk about that next
Yeah.
week, right? So then, second part is they make loans available to Chinese companies cheaply in their own currency,
Okay.
right? So what the Chinese do is they buy machines, they buy machinery, real plant and machinery. They invest in real things, as well as real estate, but also real things. That boosts the productivity of China. So that is a sort of a double positive whammy for China and negative whammy for America. Now, the most important aspect of this is by buying American government IOUs, they keep the rate of interest in America lower than it should be, right? Because they're actually buying American treasuries, and American treasuries are bonds, right?
Right.
And bonds have two parts to them, right?
Yeah.
One is they have a rate of interest and they have a price. So as they buy up more bonds, the price rises.
Okay.
The counterintuitive thing about bonds is that as the price rises, the yield has to fall, right? Because they're
Yeah.
a fixed income security. So what the Chinese are doing is they are putting a floor on the global rate of interest. This is the key.
Okay.
And that floor is keeping global interest rates lower than they should otherwise be. So the Chinese are doing two things. They are managing to disguise their competitive position, number one. They're managing to ensure their competitive position, number two, because their exchange rate isn't rising. But number three, they are, by keeping Western interest rates low, they are minimizing the real impact on us of what's actually happening, which is our manufacturing base is actually sliding progressively to China.
Right.
And how are they doing that? They're keeping interest rates low. So they're saying, don't you worry about manufacturing. You can buy real estate. You can feel rich. You can feel wealthy. So this, as interest rates remain low, what happens is when interest rates are low, people borrow
Yeah.
more than they should. And when interest rates are low, banks lend more than they should, which leads us to the financial crisis,
Yeah.
right? So this is a jamboree of buying and lending. Progressively over time, you see asset prices rising rapidly. This is what's pushing prices of flats and apartments away from our children because the rate of interest is artificially low
Can I?
all around the world.
Yeah. So let me just ask you this. This is a cynical view, but was this always the Chinese strategy? And also was part of that Chinese strategy, was that to create the environment where the great financial crisis could occur?
Well, I don't believe.
That's
there's-
real spectre stuff.
There's a touch of the James Bond about this.
Go on.
Right. The first idea is there's this incredibly clever fella in China who's pulling all the strings.
Yeah.
And a lot of people believe that. Fu Manchu, John, do you remember him?
I do
Right.
remember him.
Okay.
Fu Manchu.
The Fu Manchu of monetary
Yeah.
economics, right? The other thing is that never, ever ascribe to genius what can actually be explained by incompetence, right? Okay, I've always felt this, right?
Yeah.
That, again, we come back. Remember, I talked about biology. You know, the economy evolves and things change and there's unintended consequences. So I don't think it was an explicit strategy to undermine the West, but I think it was an explicit strategy to make sure that China propelled itself to growth via exports.
Right.
Right?
By creating an uneven playing field.
By creating an uneven playing field, it's basically what Japan did. It's what all the Asians have done, which is they've always undervalued their currency to gain market share.
Okay.
Whether you're Korean, whether you're Japanese, whatever, right? And the Westerners were just too busy talking about democracy to see what was going on, right? We're talking about, transgender toilets or something.
Were we asleep at the wheel?
Completely, right?
Right.
So now what you have is a situation that the way in which China has managed its monetary affairs in a world of free capital movements has had a significant impact on asset prices all around the world.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the Chinese. A lot of emerging market countries have been at this because they all saw throughout the 90s that the only way to grow as a developing country is export. Ireland's done the same thing, except we just managed to play with our tax system.
Right.
So
okay.
we did with our tax system what the Chinese are doing with their exchange rate.
Gotcha.
But the ultimate long-term objective was to take money from the Americans.
Yeah.
And the Americans are beginning to wake up to this.
Yeah.
But it's a sort of a hysterical sort of wakening up. It's a hysterical reaction. And they're kicking out at everybody. But what has happened is America has been, since the early 2000s, the locomotive of the world economy. It's one that's been growing quickly. But it's been growing quickly because others have allowed it to do so. So, for example, the central banks of many, many emerging economies or developing economies are doing exactly the same.
Right.
They're holding their exchange rate down against the dollar because they want to export to America.
Yeah. So what's the long term?
America's the consumer. America is the big fat kid in the sweet shop.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have loads of all that sort of stuff, right?
I want it now.
I want it now. And if I don't have the income, I'll borrow from tomorrow to pay for shit today. And who's going to lend me the money? The Chinese. Now, in the beginning, the Americans, the Chinese are really stupid. They're giving us all this money. But the Fu Manchu approach is that the Chinese are just allowing the Americans to get into more and more and more debt.
Here's more rope.
Here's more rope. Exactly. And they're hanging them slowly. But the way in which this impacts on our societies is through, well, it impacts on financial market assets, right? Stock markets. But most Irish people don't own stocks. Most British people don't own stocks. Americans do, but most Canadians, they don't, right? Where we really see it is in residential property.
Yeah.
Because this process of financialization has turned residential property from being a home into being an asset to speculate against.
Yeah.
Right? A wealth creator. And once you go down this route, it's very, very hard to reverse. And of course, the next podcast with Russell will be on how this is unraveling now, how this trade has changed, how the Chinese have now gone from a country which in the first 20 years of this policy was a country trying to prevent its exchange rate rising. Now, what it wants its exchange rate to fall. So they're having their gold standard moment where they now need to expand, not contract. They want their local economy to expand. They want their local economy to expand quicker than America's.
They're kind of in trouble at the moment.
Because they're in trouble.
Yeah.
So the question is now, if that leads to a reversal of Chinese policy, right, then the last 30 years of financial relations, global financial relations, goes into reverse. And what does that mean for us? Because we are passive in this game.
Yeah.
The Europeans have been passive. We're not actively playing. Europeans are just sitting back waiting for all this to happen. At least the Americans have voted for Trump and say actively, okay, this has to stop.
Yeah.
But we're just sitting here passively hoping to have a seat at the table. A, I don't think we have a seat at the table. B, I don't think there's enough people to understand what the hell's going on. And C, all the while, and this is the key, the younger generation feel locked out of the economic party. And that is leading them to have radical solutions, to have radical ideas. And why wouldn't they? Because when they look at us as 20-year-olds or 25-year-olds and we could move out with our girlfriends and our boyfriends and move into a flat and buy a place and they're like stuck in the box room in their mum and dad's. And that all comes back to a decision in Beijing in 1994.